You know, the American Revolution, it's one of those stories we all think we know. But as we get closer to the nation's 250th anniversary, that classic story is being turned completely upside down, challenging just about everything we learned in school.
And that really gets to the heart of it. That familiar story of heroic patriots in a noble fight for freedom, well, it turns out that's just scratching the surface. The reality is way more complicated, a lot messier, and honestly a whole lot more interesting.
So that's the big question, isn't it? If we peel back all those layers of myth, what was the American Revolution actually like for the real people who lived and died through it? All right, let's dive in.
So on one side you have the story we all know, a unified fight for freedom, heroic founding fathers, a simple moral cause. But the deeper story that historians are now uncovering, it's a whole different world. We're talking about a brutal civil war, deeply flawed and complex leaders, and a cause just riddled with contradictions.
So, first things first, we've got to tackle this idea that it was some kind of unified front. The truth is, the revolution wasn't just colonists versus the British. In a very real and tragic way, it was a war that Americans fought against themselves.
Wow. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. A terribly tragic civil war. That phrase alone just completely reframes the whole conflict. It stops being this glorious war and becomes this incredibly painful, personal tragedy that literally tore colonial society apart at the seams.
And these divisions ran incredibly deep. We're talking neighbor turning against neighbor. There was horrific violence between civilians, particularly down in South Carolina. And get this, it went all the way to the top. Benjamin Franklin's own son, William, led a Loyalist group that basically acted as a death squad, hunting and killing patriots. Can you even imagine that? A founding father's son trying to destroy the very revolution his father was building?
And if a civil war wasn't complicated enough, it was also a world war. This wasn't some isolated little squabble in the colonies. No, this was a global showdown. You had the superpowers of the day, Britain and France, battling for imperial dominance, and North America was the grand prize. And caught right in the middle were powerful native nations, forced to make impossible choices just to protect their own people and their sovereignty.
And all of this leads us to maybe the most profound and difficult contradiction of the entire era. This was a fight for liberty, being led by men who owned other human beings.
This is the question that just hangs over everything, isn't it? How do you possibly reconcile the beautiful soaring language of the Declaration of Independence with the cold, hard fact that the man who wrote it, Thomas Jefferson, and the general who led the army, George Washington, were both slaveholders?
Now, the easy answer is to just call them hypocrites. But the truer answer is that they were complex, conflicted men. Jefferson knew slavery was wrong. He wrote about it. But his entire fortune, his entire way of life was tied up in the people he owned. As this historian puts it, it's an uncomfortable truth. But when your principles are at war with your pocketbook, the pocketbook usually wins.
So imagine you were an enslaved person at that time. Where do you go? Who do you fight for? The path to freedom was anything but clear. And these numbers tell a powerful story. For every black person who sought freedom with the Patriots, 3 times as many went to the British. Why? Because the British were opportunistically offering freedom to any enslaved person who escaped a Patriot master. For thousands, it was the most tangible shot at liberty they had.
In fact, you could argue that the Patriot cause was, in some ways, actively hostile to black freedom. I mean, at the start of the war, George Washington himself banned black men from serving in the Continental Army. And historians say his concern wasn't just about their ability to fight. It was that if you arm black men, you start to erode the very foundation of slavery that the Southern economy was built on.
So to really understand this time, we have to look past the famous founders, the marble statues, and listen to the voices that are so often left out of the history books.
Take Abigail Adams. She's writing to her husband John in 1776, while he's off helping build a new nation. And in this incredible letter she tells him, hey, remember the ladies. Right in the middle of a revolution about representation, she's pointing out that half the population is being completely ignored.
And what about Native Americans? For nations like the Mohawk, this wasn't some philosophical debate. It was about pure survival. They were trapped between 2 expanding empires. Choosing which side to back wasn't about ideals. It was a desperate calculation about who offered the better chance to hold on to their land and their people.
And then you have the absolutely powerful story of Elizabeth Freeman. Here's an enslaved woman in Massachusetts who hears all this talk about freedom and inalienable rights, and she takes those ideals, walks into a courtroom, and uses the brand new state constitution to sue for her own freedom.
And she wins. She basically weaponized the revolution's own language against slavery itself. It's just an amazing story of courage.
So this brings us to the final, really crucial question. Why does all this messy, complicated history matter so much right now? Well, because the core battles of the revolution are, in so many ways, still being fought today. As this historian points out, a lot of our political fights today are really a battle over who owns the revolution's legacy. You have groups all across the political spectrum trying to claim that they are the true heirs of the founders, using that story to justify their own agendas today.
And that's the real takeaway here. Those deep, unresolved questions from that era about who gets to be a citizen, what rights really mean, what democracy actually looks like. They're not just history. They're the very same issues fueling our most intense, most divisive debates right now.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty sobering thought. The founders created this republic, but they were deeply worried it wouldn't survive. So as we approach this 250th anniversary, still grappling with these same foundational conflicts, you have to ask yourself, is the American experiment, born from all that contradiction and conflict, still at risk today?